Morning, everybody. Happy week 74 of silly season, in which the government is reheating its announcements it had to U-turn on 3 years ago. And welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist, Darren Lewis. Morning, Darren.
Good morning. Good morning. What's in the cup?
Tea, obvs. It's not gin. I mean, wait until 10:30 after conference. This is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to try reheating something you couldn't stomach 3 years ago and see if it's got any better with time. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the remarkable scenes from Sinead O'Connor's funeral yesterday, along with the royal family's plans to commemorate the death of the Queen last year. But I want to take us inside to page 20, where I'm furious, and now correct me if I'm wrong, Darren, but Rishi Sunak has been asked to make sure, it looks like in this story, right? Rishi Sunak has been asked to make sure that his MPs turn up to work. And he's just sort of shrugged and said, nah. Am I right? What's happened here? What's the story about?
Well, this is a story of Nadine Dorries, who some people might know from reality TV. She's probably more well-known.
You won't know her from the House of Commons because she hasn't been there for ages.
And I do love the headline because it does really sum up the situation. She is like the dinner party guest who doesn't know when it's time to leave. She announced in June that she was quitting Parliament.
With immediate effect.
With immediate effect, indeed. She didn't get the period. She threw her toys out of the pram, but she's still there. She hadn't spoken in Parliament for longer than a year. I think she last was in April the 7th. Correct me if I'm wrong. But she's still there. She's constituents in Flitwick. They've all called for her to go. She is still there. She last voted in April, definitely. But she is still there, spending our money, taking our money for the square root of not doing very much. Now, the interesting thing is that even, listen, I have no time whatsoever for the rather reprehensible immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, but even he has called for her to go on TV this morning.
He hasn't called for her to go on TV, we should say. He was on TV. She's already on TV. She's on GB News.
I didn't want to, but you can.
She's on GBBs. So this is a story about the fact that Number 10 was asked, are you going to do anything about this? And the answer was, well, it's up to the voters of Mid Bedfordshire to decide who they want to represent them. Okay, well, give them the vote then, Darren. Why isn't Rishi Sunak calling the general election so the people of, or even a by-election, which he has the power to do? He has the power to eject one of his own MPs, so that to give the people that chance, because at the moment they don't have the right to recall her for anything.
No, they don't. And this is the thing that, I mean, we're smiling about it, but, you know, the serious aspect of this is that it's symbolic of the lack of accountability for this government and its ministers past and present. We saw Boris Johnson not turning up for work and going off on holidays as and when he wanted to. We saw the conduct of the reprehensible Lee Anderson yesterday. His comments have been called interesting, foul-mouthed and salty. They're racist. And yet there is zero accountability for him. You look at Rishi Sunak, you ask the question about what he's doing. He is a lame duck. He's a glove puppet. He is not there to keep anyone in line because he can't. He is not in control of the party. He is just there as a figurehead, which is the reason why Sir Chris Bryant has been looking to change the rules so that if she can actually be required to attend Parliament, and then they can look at ways that they can actually affect her removal, because you cannot have a situation where a former cabinet minister, an MP, simply doesn't turn up for work. And remember, this is the party that talks about work-shy layabouts all over the country, sponging off the system. What are they doing?
Exactly, and she's getting rather more money than the average asylum seeker does to get through the week. So what do you think, everybody? Do you think Nadine Dorries' version of immediate effect should actually apply, and if she doesn't resign, someone should resign for her? Do you think that the dictionary and the word immediate needs to be redefined and rewritten in order to take into account that it doesn't apply to Nadine Dorries? Mike says, to be fair, if MPs could be recalled just because they didn't do the job they were elected for, Parliament would be a wilderness. It does seem rather that Rishi Sunak is in the charge of his party, as opposed to party's in charge of him rather than the other way around. But basically, Nadine Dorries, the wannabe celebrity of this parish, hasn't done the job of an MP for a year. The chairman of her local council, I think it's called Flitwick, has begged her to hold a constituency surgery, which he says hasn't happened. She hasn't spoken in the House of Commons for more than a year and hasn't voted since April. Now, I happen to know that MPs on all sides would rather she wasn't there causing a fuss. As you said, Darren, Robert Jenrick, the immigration minister, said she ought to go. But Rishi doesn't want, let's face it, another by-election where her 24,000 majority would end up in the bin pretty quickly. As a massive protest vote against the government. Now, they do seem to think by-elections always go against the government, and it's just not indicative of what happens in a general election. But are the Tories really just hoping that if they hold out for another year to a general election, that somehow everyone in Mid-Bedfordshire would come around to the idea that the Tories are great with another year with Nadine Dorries as their not MP?
Yeah, and I can't see that happening at all. I mean, obviously, we've seen very recently that the Tories are very fortunate not to lose Uxbridge, Boris Johnson's seat, because of that protest vote against the ULEZ, which really hurt Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, quite badly. But as you say, I think this is far more of a tap-in. I'm kind of conflicted in some ways, Susie, because there is a part of me that believes that the government would rather this particular story continue to dominate, to kind of take the heat off the Anderson comments, which are self-explanatory for every decent person, and really, really did characterize what we've all known about the party, the Conservative Party, for quite some time. And so part of me just thinks that there is an element within the Tory party that thinks, well, let's just let this fester. Let's let everyone talk about it on shows just like this. But I did like what I saw from Chris Bryant this morning, because he's saying, look, let's recall her to Parliament. Let's have her sanctioned if she hasn't voted by, I think it's October the 26th. And that's going to mark 6 months since she last did. And he wants a table of motion that will actually get her in front of MPs, and it would be considered a contempt of Parliament if she were to refuse to do so, and that would be punishable with a suspension. I think we need to get some mechanics in place so that we can actually deal about it. Yeah, MPs on all sides can be angry, and commentators like us can be, but I think action is needed. Now, just to say, Nadine's been on I think she's been on Twitter saying that, so Chris is trying to flog his book, and he is, let's not kid ourselves, he is trying to do that. But the facts are that what he has put forward is what we should see, because at the moment, MPs are taking the public for a ride because of the archaic system that exists inside Westminster.
Well, it's not just that. It's also the fact, I mean, Nadine's had plenty of books that she's flogging. In fact, she's spending more time writing that than she's dealing with her constituents. And they're not very good books for that. Mike says, Nadine has now been resigning with immediate effect for longer than Liz Truss was Prime Minister. Probably some time ago, Mike. But it's the fact as well that we've got a zombie government that just isn't really... It's not fit for anything. That's why it's reheating ideas about Ascension Island and sending migrants to a place that they would have to rebuild from the bottom up and send a load of concrete to first. It would cost billions. It would cost £1 million a head to send migrants to Ascension Island, and yet they decide to reheat it and re-mention it because everything else is going so horribly wrong. They have Lee Anderson out there saying his stuff, and they think, well, actually, there's quite a few people who probably agree with him, so we won't bother to knock him down. John says, you can be sure those MPs have had their jabs. Different law for them, bloody Tories. I don't know that they will have had their jabs, actually, John. I think that's probably not right, but I can understand your attitude. It is just a case that the government is sort of limping on. Everyone wants a general election. Everyone wants it done and over. They're absolute toast. But they do seem to be holding on for the last year's salary, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I do feel sorry for those voters in Flitwick, because, you know, you do have a situation where you have Nadine Dorries, who's doing everything but her job. And as I said before, the thing that really does stick in the craw is the fact that the Tories are the first to criticize people they believe to be sponging from the system, taking taxpayers' money, a drain on the resources of this country, and yet they are taking exorbitant amounts of money, the money we pay them, our money, to live the life that they want to. And then when she does, as she is at the moment, she'll resign. She's resigned, and she is working for a TV channel, and she'll go on reality TV shows, and they'll do all sorts of things. And we've seen that so many times. They wreck our lives, and then they go on to areas in the media where they can make more money and have some fun. I saw Hancock on TikTok making an idiot of himself yesterday. He's already been on in the jungle. These people are making money after wrecking our lives or backing policy that wrecks our lives, and yet we are supposed to be sympathetic or understanding when they don't turn up for work. It's actually a disgrace, and I think, although I do think it's taken the heat off the situation regarding Lee Anderson, I think it should be in the public domain, because I think the system should be changed. I think Sir Chris was talking about something in a motion in 1801, that you had to get permission to absent yourself from Parliament. Well, let's see her go before Parliament and actually account for what has been a shameful dereliction of duty.
Yeah, there is certainly some arguments to be had. I would have thought about that, and that the government has the power to eject one of their own MPs and force a by-election if it wants to look like it's in charge of its MPs. It has the right to censure or remove the whip. And as Chris Bryant is proceeding with this motion, he wants to try and put this motion down in Parliament for them to recall her to Parliament. I mean, she could just turn up and have a vote and then put it off. It's not difficult.
Well, that's the system, isn't it? That's a problem.
That's what she could do. But if she didn't, and they did have a vote on it, you know, the Tories would probably abstain, and then Labour and the rest would carry it, and she could be suspended or investigated or whatever. And then, you know, potentially suspended for more than 10 days, and therefore force a by-election. But that would take months, and we're pretty much at a general election by that point. So it's all a bit ridiculous. There should be a better system of recall, which I could have sworn one MP called Nadine Dorries once argued an awful lot for in the House of Commons. We shall see, won't we? Anyway, from one mad nads to another mad idea, and the government has just announced, ahead of what is expected to be one of the worst flu seasons ever, that it will not be vaccinating millions of people against COVID and flu this winter. Now, those aged 50 to 64, about 12 million people will not be getting the vaccinations, which will be delivered later this year in order to maximise protection for those over 65. So they're giving them later, and they're not giving them to everybody. Now, this has been a decision by the Secretary of State, Steve Barclay. He was following the advice from the JCVI, which offers advice on these things, but it is possible to overrule them, for goodness sake. It is fundamentally his decision. And at the same time, Darren, the Zoe COVID study reckons the rate of COVID infections jumped by a third last month to 785,000, probably because we're all indoors because of the rain. Does this really seem like the right time to be stopping vaccinations?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And I'm glad you pointed to the fact that the rate of COVID has jumped, because everybody believes it's gone away. Now, listen, we know there are some people that vaccines are not for them, and that's fine. But those people who are concerned about their health and are concerned about vaccines, they will be worried about what we're discussing. And it's another example, Susie, of yet another group of people that the government simply don't care about. We've known for a long time that they've been very self-serving and that they've ignored totally varying groups. And let's not kid ourselves. These aren't just numbers. These are our parents, grandparents, relatives, people we love, people we care about. The COVID disasters and heartbreaks of a couple of years ago have not gone. People are still burying loved ones, and people are still living with the grief of losing their loved ones because of the government's chaotic COVID strategy. That's why all of this matters. So for the government to turn around and say that they are not going to give the COVID jab to people within this group, it's all over 50s, isn't it?
Yeah, between 50 and 64. Everyone over 65 will still get the jab because they're considered most at risk. But those aged 50 to 64, which includes plenty of people who are at more risk than your average 18-year-old, for example, are not going to be offered the chance to get it. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think this is a problem? Do you think this is quite reasonable? And if the JCVI is suggesting it, then the government should, of course, go along with it. Or do you think this is something where the Secretary of State should be overruling them and saying, actually, no, because as Caroline has pointed out on Twitter, how can they not understand a vaccine is cheaper than a 10-day stay in hospital with pneumonia or worse? And Katrina there saying, my appointment's just been texted to me. Thank goodness I live in Scotland. There are plenty of people who want this protection. And when you said earlier on, Darren, some people don't want it, that's fine. I disagree with you. I don't think it is fine to not have this vaccine if you are perfectly healthy, because you are, by having the vaccine, you are protecting all those people who would die from it, all those people around you, the next person who touches the door handle, the person that gets coughed on the train, whatever it is, you're helping to protect each other. And that was something that pandemic, I thought, brought out in us as a nation, as a species, actually, was the willingness. And the government was surprised by this as well, the very rapid willingness to look out for each other and go, no, we'll hunker down, we'll wear masks, we'll do what's necessary because this is how we get through it. And I think if you're not having the vaccine and you're forgetting the fact that there are still those people out there that are vulnerable, then you've not learned the lessons of what happened to us over the last 2 or 3 years. But it is fundamentally probably down the fact that it does seem like for most people that the pandemic is a long way behind us. And they seem to have thought that it's not, an urgent thing anymore. The uptake of these vaccines, okay, so the flu vaccine has gone down from 50% down to 40% last year, and the COVID vaccine went down from 70% down to about 50%. So people do seem to feel it's a long way behind us and they don't need to worry about it anymore. But seeing as there's another pandemic due in inside a decade, so we've got another 7 years left for the next one, surely we should be keeping our immune systems topped up a bit, don't you think?
Well, yes, in a word, and you are right, actually, to correct me, and I should have actually phrased that far better. It's people's prerogative, but not to have the vaccine. But as you rightly say, exercising that prerogative affects other people as well for the very reasons that you've set out a second ago. And I think it kind of is symbolic of our society where we're set from the top, that people stop caring about other people, whether that's through wearing masks, whether that's through taking the vaccine, whether that's through just thinking about the effect of your actions on other people. So you're right to pull me up on that. I think as far as, what was your other question again? Let's see.
Well, the fact that we do need to sort of be aware that there is another pandemic coming, keeping our immune systems protected against the things we already know would probably be a good idea. Give us the best chance to get through the next one.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think it was the committee chair, Professor Wai Shen Lim, who was saying that they were focusing on those with the greatest risk of getting seriously ill. But as you say, COVID hasn't gone away. We're moving towards the back end of the year. We'll go towards the flu season, in inverted commas, and people will be affected. And you don't have to have previously been seriously ill or had your health affected to be somebody who is at risk from COVID, as we know.
And flu, as we also know, it doesn't affect the same people as COVID. I mean, if you are vulnerable, you're at more risk, but you can still get it when you're very young, and it can still really kill you. And it is a serious thing. When people walk around saying, "Oh, I've got the flu," no, you haven't. The flu is when you go to bed, as I did once when I got it when I was in my 20s. You go to bed and you don't wake up for a week because you're in a raging fever. It's when you see a £50 note on the floor and you cannot physically pick it up. That's when you've got the flu, not when you've got a bad.
I'd have a good go though, Susie. I would have a good go at that.
Yeah, well, yes, but if you really still can't do it, then you've got the flu, Darren, and only then. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think that we're being a bit ridiculous and it's time to perhaps stop spending money on these vaccines if we don't all need them, and just concentrate perhaps on the most vulnerable who do have them? Sophie says on Twitter, so they've stopped pretending to care about us. They're too preoccupied creating division and hatred to actually prevent any further deaths. Well, this is fun, as replied to the Mirror, saying, because there you go, sorry, it's the same one I've just read out. They're too preoccupied creating division and hatred to show that they care about us, which is what they're trying to do, of course, during the pandemic, during the lockdowns and so on. Now, one of the reasons that I get cross about this, Darren, and I've said it before on this show, okay, I qualified for the over 50 vaccine, despite being many decades younger, because I have epilepsy, which put me sort of an extra 10 years up in terms of when I got my vaccine. Then I got it a month or so earlier when we were all getting the vaccines. So last year, I got a free COVID jab. I had to pay for my flu jab. But this year, I could pay privately for my flu jab, but I can't get the COVID jab privately. I can't go and pay for it. It's not going to be available to anybody. But yet I have epilepsy. I am more vulnerable than other 40-somethings because of my neurological condition. There are other people out there with disabilities who are in my age group or underlying concerns, or who are caring for someone else, perhaps, who want to have that vaccine to protect them. And their children might get it at school, and their parents might get it if they're over 65, but they don't get it themselves. And therefore, their family unit is at more risk. And it doesn't make any sense, really, to block it off to everybody. And I assume from seeing this story that because I am in the over 50s group for my vaccine, and the over 50s aren't now getting it, that they've decided I am expendable. Is this the government out to get me? I mean, it was 12 million other people involved in this. They haven't done it just because of my fight with the Ministry of Defence, I'm sure. But
no, but I think you're right. It is a government that has never really thought through its COVID strategy right from the start. And that when I say right from the start, I go back to the ludicrous advice that the Prime Minister, at the time Boris Johnson, had been giving, going around talking about washing your hands for as long as it takes to sing happy birthday, and ignoring the science and all of the things that had cost people their lives and their loved ones their lives. And this is yet another example of that, somebody not thinking about people just like you and the people affected by not being able to cater for you. And as our previous tweeter was saying, they just stop pretending to care. I remember when there were lots of Black and brown people who were dying right at the start, and when the vaccine list, the priority list, had been given out, they weren't on it, even though all of our outlets, the Mirror, all of our colleagues on the other newspapers, all of our broadcast media outlets were reporting the disproportionate number of deaths, and yet they were not on the vaccine priority list. And this is another example of a government that has never really cared about us, but presented the illusion that they did. And it's an example of a strategy that has just not catered for you, Susie. And I share your anger, because I think, what do you do? Where do you go? And when the government gaslights people just like you and says it's your responsibility to go out, come forward and get your vaccine when you can, when they haven't made provision for you, I'm totally with you.
Yeah, there are so many other people who are in a much worse state than me and who deserve to have some protection if they need it. And also for their families, there should be a way that if you're caring for people who have vulnerabilities, that you yourself qualify for the vaccine. Someone has just sent me on Twitter the Scottish instructions for what they're doing with the vaccine. Everyone over 50 and those with certain conditions will be offered a flu vaccination. People aged 50 to 64 with no underlying health conditions are now being called forward for appointments from the 4th of September. And the flu programme is being expanded to include secondary and infant pupils as well, and those aged 6 months to under 2 years who are at risk. So, I mean, that's just the flu vaccine. But if the other home nations are starting to do this, I do suspect that England is going to have to do it at some point, and we'll be doing it at the last minute and in a bloody rush, and it won't be as good. And what does that remind us of? 2020 all over again. It's like Boris Johnson is still here. God almighty. Anyway, it's all a bit depressing, isn't it? But we'll find a way through it eventually.
Make us smile, Susie. Make us smile. Round off by making us smile.
We have managed to find some good news in the world for you, everybody. And here it is. Now, I climbed a really big hill last week. That's not the good news. But I did it with a 7-year-old, and it knocked us both for 6. It had frightening edges. There are potential pitfalls. There's rain, clouds, great views. I fell in the river when we came down. There was a big row. But yesterday, an 8-year-old boy with no legs climbed a big hill, and in doing so raised £20,000 for charity. Now, Tony Hudgell, some of you may know his story. He was badly abused and injured by his biological parents who were jailed for it. He's been raised by an adoptive family. And he did the fundraiser. He started charity work during the pandemic after being inspired by Captain Tom's walk around his garden. And there he is at the top of Orist Head in the Lake District, 800 feet or so above sea level, with the mountaineers Chris Bonington and Harry Buddha-Megar, who is a fellow amputee, a Nepalese man who climbed Everest recently. Now, Darren, is this proof that sometimes not having something, be it a functioning MP, access to a vaccine, or indeed legs, can often inspire people to go out and really rise above it?
Absolutely, yes. I love this boy. He's only 8 years old. He's got 2 prosthetic legs. And yeah, you know, if you're not feeling particularly inspired this morning, he will lift you. He will put a smile on your face. It's such a good example, as you say, of not having something, but being grateful and working with what you have. And honestly, it isn't just an inspiration to other young kids his age. He's an inspiration to you and I. You know, we tend to moan about our lot, don't we? And we don't know how blessed we are. And yet this guy...
I did not moan when I was on my way up that hill last week. I tell you, there was an awful lot.
How long did it take you?
Going, oh, bloody hell, why are we doing this?
How long did it take you, Susie?
What was it? It was, I think we were about 4 or 5 hours. We went up Penny Van in the Brecon Beacons, and it was a long way up. It was short on the way down. Listen, we did fall in the river at the end, so it was all a bit strenuous.
The wonderful thing about Tony, 3 years ago, you raised £1.7 million by walking 10K on his prosthetic legs. He's already a Pride of Britain winner of the Young Fundraiser Award. And this particular challenge has raised 20 grand so far, and I'm sure it's going to raise some more as well. I mean, this is a guy, you know, as you've been saying, you were moaning going up that hill, and I would have been exactly the same. But this boy, Tony, he doesn't moan. He just gets on, and he is a real lesson to us all.
Yeah, I'll tell you what was one great quote in that story, actually. So Harry, the Nepalese guy, he was a double amputee, went up Everest, and he said to Tony when they got to the top, he said, I couldn't keep up with you. You were far ahead of me. I was trying to catch up with you and you were gone. It was just good to know. Yeah, if you can outrun someone who's been up Everest, then you're probably destined for great things. So well done, Tony. Well done, everyone who's donated to his cause. I'm sure you can find it if you have a little look online, and contributes to what he's doing. I'm sure there'll be more stuff as well that he will do. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, Darren, for explaining it. Maybe at some point, you know, if Tony can get up a mountain, then the voters of Mid Bedfordshire could sign a recall petition and get Nadine hauled to the ballot box where she ought to be, or out, or somewhere else, and then she can... I don't know why she's delaying it. Maybe it's just the fact she's completely unemployable. Who knows? And perhaps maybe, you know, eventually Steve Barclay will come around to the idea that people with disabilities and people with underlying health conditions and people with caring responsibilities do need the vaccine, without which he will be spending an awful lot more money on healthcare this winter, with more problems in the NHS with flu and COVID. Anyway, got all that to look forward to. At the moment, it's still mid-August. There's still another couple of weeks of silly season. And then, of course, we go into conference season when the politicians will all be off, out and living it up. And they don't get back, I don't think, to Parliament until early October. So we'll see how things pan out, won't we, over the next few months. But thank you for taking us through all that, Darren. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. And we will see you all again next Monday, I think, yes, for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.